So good morning, everyone, and welcome. Wonderful to see you all as we continue with our series on biomimicry and resurrection. This week, we have Lynn Hartman, who will be continuing what was begun last week with Kathy Brown, Restlessness and Resurrection, the Undeniable Urge of Migration and Sandhill Cranes and Other Bird Life. And Lynn Hartman, of course, is known to us, but for those who don't know some of the details of her background, she is an MD, retired from a 30-year career at Mayo as an oncologist and cancer researcher. She and her partner, Mary, moved to St. Paul in 2018 and joined St. John's shortly thereafter. Bird watching is one of Lynn's favorite pursuits, along with reading, hiking, and checking out new coffee shops and neighborhoods in St. Paul. So please join me in welcoming Lynn.
Okay, thank you. I'm very excited to be able to visit with you this morning. Let me know if you can't hear me properly. I'd like to start by thanking Craig, who is with us via Zoom today from Toronto. Craig invited Kathy and I to share our interest in birds with you, and this has turned into a wonderful relationship between Kathy and I, friendship, and we had so much fun thinking through what we wanted to talk about. So, King Solomon, the wise Solomon, exclaimed, "Things which are too wonderful for me, the way of an eagle in the air." We'll come back to this. Let's, though, start with a prayer from our Book of Common Prayer. Please read this with me, if you would. Almighty God, you made the universe with all its marvelous order and the infinite complexity of living creatures. Grant that, as we progress creation, we may come to know you more truly and more surely fulfill our role in your eternal purpose. So we're going to look at some mysteries today and to know God more truly through those mysteries of nature, and what is our role in maintaining this creation. So 1782, this seal of the United States was adopted officially. Many committees, Congress wasn't happy, finally. They liked the eagle in the center, and this eagle is our national symbol, the bald eagle. Another reason for us to know about the eagle, as Craig and Kathy reminded me, the eagle is the symbol of St. John the Evangelist, so highly relevant to our world. A few facts about our national symbol. It's our largest bird in this part of the country, wingspan 7 feet, about 3 feet tall. The female, eagles are raptors or birds of prey, and in raptors, the female is larger than the male by about 25 to 30%. Why? Yeah, why exactly this sexual dimorphism, as it's called, is not entirely known. We can talk more about that, why that might be. She does tend to be the main presence on the nest, which is where very important events are occurring. And that ability to be larger, fight harder might factor into that. Eagles, the bald eagle is a sea eagle. It's in that category. There are 60 species of eagle in the world, 60. Only 2 occur in North America. The other is the golden eagle, much less common. The sea eagle loves fish first and foremost, but bald eagles will eat dead meat along the side of the road, wherever they find a carcass. Smaller birds, ducks, coots, rodents, they will steal food. If they can get a free meal, they'll definitely do that. And it's that feature that caused Ben Franklin to have some qualms about adopting this bird as our national symbol. The bald eagle is unique to North America. It's not seen on any other continent. In the wild, They live about 25 years if they make it through the first year. We'll see what young have to go through, and only about 50% of those new eaglets make it through the first year. Now, when we think about migration, Kathy last week presented the classic long-distance migrant, this tiny little swift that migrates between continents. Bald eagles and birds of this size don't do that. The bald eagle travels as far as it needs to find food. So what we're seeing in that orange color, that's a breeding range. So there are eagles that breed across Canada and Alaska, but when the weather gets very cold, they need to go south to continue to find food, as shown in the blue color, winter ground. So they're going to come south to find open water. In the purple, and that's where we are, along the Mississippi River, the temperatures are such, the water is open, they can stay there year round. Many do, some move slightly south. So it's a much more complicated migration story, but we still use that term in these animals. We have, besides being the land of lakes, another reason for Minnesotans to be proud, and we don't like to show our pride that much. We are the land of eagles. Of the contiguous 48 states, Minnesota has by far more eagles than any other state. Alaska has the most, but we're right up there. What we're seeing here is the business end of a raptor, an eagle. These feet, those talons, are like razor blades attached to the end of their toes. And these feet are designed to generate tensile strength. They can keep gripping and gripping 10 times the grip of a human hand. They attack with their feet, they kill with their feet. Kathy, would you introduce us to the bald eagle call?
Definitely.
Thank you. You know, you don't attach that sound to those feet necessarily. It doesn't sound nearly fierce enough. But when that female is on the nest and there's an intruder coming and she's on the eggs, and you hear that sound, the male is there in nanoseconds. And certainly the wildlife in our country know that sound, respect it. Let's talk about the pair, because so much of their year is spent together. This relationship is what allows more eagles. So bald eagles and most raptors are monogamous. Once a pair is established, they've successfully had young, raised them, they will stay together for many years. What they are most attached to is their nest and their territory, both the male and the female. The pair is together about 10 months of the year, will go through this life cycle together. Once they've raised the young have left the nest and are more independent. The pairs of eagles become more independent themselves. They collect in large groups, getting ready for winter. When they're in their breeding psyche, they do not tolerate other birds around. But when they're in that winter mode, they do congregate. In fact, where Mary and I lived along the Mississippi in December, you could look out the window, there's the river, it's mostly frozen. We could see 30 eagles at one time, perched on the ice, flying over. Any trivia buffs know what the name for a collection of eagles? A convocation is a group of eagles. Isn't that great? I mean, they deserve that word. So let's say they've had their winter space. They've been apart for a couple of months. We're fast forwarding because we have a lot to go through quickly. Now they've come back together. And when the pair comes back to their territory, they haven't presumably seen each other for a couple of months. They want to know if you still have it. Are you still the one? And if you're a bird of prey, you do that in the air. And so this, remember last week, Kathy reminded us, look up. There is amazing stuff going on up there, and these spectacular courtship rituals where they are reforming their bond, because they are entering into some tough times with rearing young. So it's really amazing. These two birds are about to lock their talons way up in the air. They will then cartwheel down, down, down together and then separate as they get close to the ground. That takes an amazing agility and strength and balance. So we're going to look at nesting.
Have you seen that? I'm sorry. Have you
No,
seen that
I
acrobatic?
have, and it doesn't, it's not like a regular thing you're going to see every day in January, February, but you want to watch, and they will be flying together. Back to their voice this year, I was walking and I was hearing this sound I had never heard. It was a little sweet, like murmuring. And it was winter, it was very cold. And I looked and it was a pair flying really close together. And it was a different kind of music all together, and they perched together. So there's a lot to see. And we'll go through each of these phases. So let's just do it. Okay, anatomy for just a moment. Birds have one opening below the tail for waste excretion and for reproduction. It's called the cloaca, C-L-O-A-C-A. So then the female is fertile only 2 weeks out of the year. So they want to get this at the right time. She's clear, and so they're at their nest. They're mating fairly frequently, especially during that 2-week period. And from copulation to laying of an egg is 5 to 10 days. So the yolk or the ovum is up in her ovary, comes into the oviduct in a bird, sperm rises, fertilizes the egg, and then the shell is developed as that little tiny embryo descends through the oviduct. It's amazing. Most female bald eagles will lay 2 eggs about 3 days apart, sometimes 3, and the incubation takes a little over a month. And it's done by both birds. And interestingly, and other birds do this, they develop a bare patch on the lower belly called a brood patch, where the heat from the adult can be transmitted through the skin more effectively to the eggs and then later to the hatchlings. And they actually pull out their feathers to make this patch appear. Now, if you are starting nesting in the middle of February, here, this can happen. And I thought I would take a moment to recognize the mothers in the room. It's Mother's Day. Here's a mother right here on the nest overnight and wakes up to this. And what does she do? Like a good mother, she gets up and she shakes it off and she goes on with her day. They do have to roll their eggs about every hour or 2 so the embryo doesn't get stuck on one side of the shell. That both parents do this. They're very, very assiduous around those eggs. The male is just as committed to the success of this effort as the female. He will typically perch very close to the nest overnight. So if there's anything going on, he's right there. Female usually does the night shift. Then when she wants him, she calls, he's there with food for her. And so the days and the nights go. Here we are, 35 days later. This little creature's got to get out of that shell, which is quite firm. The parent can't do it for them. And here's what is just things which are too wonderful for me. This little thing has a tool just for the purpose of getting out of that shell. And it's sticking off the end of its bill, called an egg tooth. And it has just enough strength to push that sharp edge, which is made of keratin, like our fingernails, against the shell. And it can't poke 100 holes in there. It doesn't have the time or the energy to do that. It does it in a circumferential manner, just so that egg will crack open. And it breathes its own oxygen for the first time. When these hatchlings come out, they are helpless. They can hardly hold up their heads. But with that, what looks like an enormous bill, the mother manages to get raw meat right into that little being, and they are hungry. They want food constantly, and feeding these usually two, sometimes three little birds is quite a task. It's a full-time job for both. Now we're fast forwarding, okay? 5 weeks have gone by. Look at those feet. These are their precious parts, right? They're on display. Also, right under the throat, you see that bulge. That is the crop of these. So birds, before the stomach, if their stomach is full, they have a storage tank that they can also fill, that's ready with food that can pass into the stomach when there's room. So they're equipped to eat when there's food available, and they take advantage of that. So 9-10 weeks, here we are. That is that hatchling right there. They are the full height of the adult birds. And one of the reasons they start their nesting so early here, these young birds have to be able to be independent before winter, before the bad weather comes. They need that time. So this is a juvenile eagle or immature eagle. On this picture, you can see the size difference between the female on the left and the male on the right that we talked about before. What does an immature eagle look like in the air? We all know what the adults look like, with the white head, the white tail. They don't get their white feathers until they're about 5 years old, when they reach sexual maturity. So we see a lot of young eagles in the air, and a lot of times people think it was a golden eagle, but those are young eagles, young bald eagles. Just so I can turn you into birders for a moment, you're also going to see this bird, and it's a large bird, and it's a vulture. And we have them here in the spring, summer, and early fall, but they do migrate south in the winter. That's a turkey vulture, and they fly with their wings up like this, whereas eagles fly with their wings flat. And you see the vultures, they kind of wobble in the air when you watch them. So now you know what that is. Okay. What about our eagle, our national symbol? How healthy is the population? And what has happened to it over time? So before the arrival of European settlers, it's estimated that there were about 100,000, at least 100,000 bald eagles. You know, we don't have aerial counts and that sort of thing. So if anything, that could be an underestimate. Then what happened? European settlers arrived and spread out and grew and profited and cut down all the great white pines where these birds like to nest. They developed the shorelines where they like to fish from. Their habitat was lost. Not only that, in some areas, these birds were shot. There were bounties on them, and because they were thought to be pests, they were catching the fish and so on, the chickens, what have you. And as if that wasn't enough, during World War II, an insecticide was developed to prevent mosquitoes from causing malaria in our soldiers in the tropics. And then it was so successful, we started using it after the war on our lawns and our crops. And it got into the water supply after rains. And DDT, if you are an apex predator like an eagle, and it's in the water and in the fish, it's concentrated in those predators. What this chemical did, it interfered with handling of calcium, which is what makes the firmness of the shell. And so their shells were very delicate and they collapsed when the birds sat on them. So they were nesting, but they were not raising any young. And the eagle numbers just plummeted. In fact, it was protected in 1940, no more shooting of the birds. It was in the late 60s that it was placed on the endangered list. But still at that point, in the contiguous 48 states, there were only 800 birds left. 800 birds. That's not enough to maintain the population. The brink of collapse. The last time a survey census was done, 3 years ago, there were over 300,000 birds. I would call that resurrection.
Yes.
Renewal, renewal. How did that happen? Well, as I said, the government finally did something by putting it on the endangered list, and that put several safety measures in place. But really what had to happen was getting rid of DDT. When scientists figured out what it was doing, they banned DDT. So that was step one. We had to restore the habitat. And then scientists and biologists went to Alaska, where there were still bald eagles, and reintroduced them to their former ranges, where they succeeded, especially along the Mississippi River. Gosh, at the worst, at the nadir of all of this, there was only one bald eagle nest in about 300 miles of the Mississippi River, right along our area, and then further, one nest. Now there are close to 1,000 nests in that area. So we woke up. I meant to say, when I was talking about habitat loss and all that we did, the white man, Audubon called us the murderous white man. Really, it's the murderous white culture, I would say. It's not obviously just man. A couple of weeks ago, Jared preached about the culture of extraction. And that, I think, is kind of a euphemism for murderous. And so that's what happened, but we saw it and we came back from that and we got smarter and did something about it. Okay, what are threats to eagles today? Lead poisoning in those things at the bottom of a fishing sinkers, thank you. Shotgun pellets with lead. If hunters leave out gut piles after killing an animal, there's lead in the shot and the birds eat it. And it takes just a tiny amount of lead to poison a bird to lethality. Motor vehicle accidents, because they're going after a carcass on the side of the road. Now, because we have so many eagles, there is eagle versus eagle competition for the best nest sites, and they can fight to the death. Also, I forgot to mention on this list, electrocution. This happens to those young birds. Here's a power line, and right now, avian influenza is being seen in raptors, including bald eagles. Okay, that's the population as a whole. I wanted to close with a story about one eagle. And this bird is named Harriet, and I'll tell you why in a moment. And Harriet's obituary, when she died in 2016 at the age of 35, ran in the Washington Post. Now, why would a bird have an obituary and in the Washington Post? Let's learn about her. And the obituary started, Harriet's life work began after she lost the use of her wings. For years, this eagle flew freely over the Wisconsin wild until a day in 2000 when she was hit by a car and left on the side of the road, unable to move. She was taken, the DNR was called, came to her, taken to the Raptor Center here at the University of Minnesota. Her left wing was very severely damaged and had to be amputated. She had also been hit in the head and had some, but not severe head trauma. After rehabilitation, which was possible, what's done next is the veterinarians assess, does this bird tolerate humans? Because if it does, it can become an education bird. And if they don't, they're not euthanized. There are zoos and different places where rescue animals can stay. Harriet definitely passed that test, that she did tolerate humans. And more than that, she had the ability to look at you and continue to look at you in what many took as a very meaningful way. And VAs were looking for eagles specifically because it's a symbol of our country and our military to visit, that they could learn about. So Harriet was actually given to the National Eagle Center in Wabasha, Minnesota, and she became their first Eagle ambassador, is what they called her. And Harriet became a specialist in meeting with wounded veterans, especially amputees. And, you know, mothers would write back or wives would write back, this is the first time my son, my spouse, is back. He said that when Harriet looked at him, he felt that she knew his pain. And this was just consistent. So Harriet became very famous. Harriet was on the Today Show many times, the Leno Show, Colbert Report. When the eagle had recovered and was removed from the endangered list, Harriet went to Washington, and she was there more than once. So she represented not only eagles, but the wild world, I would say. This is Harriet on our license plate for supporting our troops. They did Photoshop out that little funny tuft of, oh, I forgot to mention, you saw that in her picture. She had this damage to her feather follicles right on top from that accident. And so her feathers up there would always grow in this manner. And that's how people knew it was Harriet. So here she is on our license plate honoring our troops. So this is my last slide. This is Harriet's life in two parts, the wild, successful bird, and then this second life, renewal, a different resurrection, if you will. And more than her own renewal, what she was able to give to so many others. So I would like us, we have plenty of time to think about things that are too wonderful for us to contemplate. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Anybody? Or anything, any questions about eagles, whatever.
Yeah, I'm just struck with Harriet that, you know, so that she's born in 80, I guess they could figure out her age. So she's almost at the end of her lifespan. when she
Yeah, she was 19 years old when she was hit.
got into that.
That's right. That's true.
And then she had this basically hold
Yes, that's,
much, given much more time
yes, that's true.
to do it.
That's true. To the second calling, whatever
Yeah.
we might call, whatever we might say.
What about the eagles, the biblical image of bearing on eagle's wings? How do, is that true? They carry the young on wings? Or-
No, they don't.
Okay, well, that's-
It's a nice image, and there are birds like loons, some waterfowl will carry their young on the back on the water, but no, they don't do that. I'm sorry.
No, excuse me. I was wondering, I'm sorry to interrupt that. But
No.
But one thought occurred to me is the story about the fellow.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Okay. No, I can pick up on that. There's another story about Harriet that kind of makes you wonder about the hand of God in this. Because at the age, when she was an eaglet in the nest in 1981, when there were very few eagles, the DNR and scientists were banding eaglets. Her nest was 86 feet up in a white pine, and a DNR biologist got up there, banded the young eagles. So now it's 19 years later, there's this injured bird on the highway in Wisconsin, and a DNR person is called, and a man got there and saw the band. And he looked in his records later after seeing to it that she got the help she needed. It was the same man who had banded her, who rescued her. So there's that. The other, it is amazing. The other thing is, why is she named Harriet? So when she was given to the Eagle Center in Wabasha, their first eagle, they said, we have to name her. We're not going to just call her Eagle. And so they asked the school children of Wabasha to write an essay about a famous American, and that would suggest a name for her. And a first grader won with his story about Harriet Tubman. And so that's how Harriet was named. Yeah. And there's so many aspects to it.
You know, I'm called loose.
Yeah. Holly?
Yeah, I was going to follow up on Barbara's question about on eagle's wings. And I don't think this is the reason. I think there are other reasons, but some of you may be familiar with churches who have lecterns that are eagles. And, you know, in fact, before I came to St. John's, I was at a church here in St. Paul that inherited an eagle from another church in St. Paul that used to be my father's. My father was a minister, so.
Okay.
And it was a golden eagle, and if you've seen them, they're quite beautiful often, and the wings are spread out, and the Bible or whatever is being read from kind of sits
That's
on the
wonderful.
back
That's
of the
wonderful.
eagle.
Yeah, that's a good
And
point.
They're stunning, stunningly beautiful, and a lot of meaning in terms of you know, where the word of God is coming from,
Yes,
and perhaps being born on eagle's wings.
yes.
You see those in Anglican churches in Great Britain all over the place.
That's a great point. Yes.
Yeah, St. Clements has a lectern like that for the lessons. I was going to mention there, I read the back page of the sports section on, I think it's, I forget Saturday, it's outdoors, and the guy is just terrific writer.
Yes.
We've written several times about the dangers of lead ammunition, and there's a real wildlife push to get copper used instead of lead. The problem is copper costs about twice as much. There's a lot of inertia, and sort of the you know, and it's really an individual thing. There's no legislation or anything like that, although some of the conservationists would like to see that. But
Thank you.
that's something that if there's ever some kind of initiative for it, you know why and how important it is. Worth supporting.
Thank you.
You would think that would affect more than the Eagles.
Oh, it
Oh, yeah,
does.
Lots of other.
Absolutely.
It does, but particularly the Raptors, which are the head of the food chain.
Mhm. You know, the Raptor Center, I want to mention, and you've probably heard about this at the University of Minnesota, famous apex center for raptor science and health. They say that of all the birds that are brought to them for a variety of reasons, about at least 20% have lead in their systems. And, you know, they can function with a certain amount of it, but it causes neurologic damage. And if it's not too much, they can actually treat that with chemicals, medicines that bind the lead and get it out of their systems. But if you're going right back into the environment where its source is, you've got a problem. Yes.
I got a couple of comments. Back to the Eagles wings. Michael Johnson wrote that piece of music, and
Craig, can you hear Mary?
Yes, not as clearly as you, Lynn, but I can hear Mary.
shall I use my radio voice?
Yes, that sounds great.
So when Michael Johnson wrote that song, he used that image, and look how that caught on. That song is still used in life transition services, always.
Mm,
And people find a great deal of comfort in that image.
mm,
And I think that's something that's very applicable to our conversation today. The other comment I want to make is that Lynn and I had the opportunity to release a couple of recap eagles last winter. I had the female and Lynn released the male. Holding the female was like holding a toddler. I mean, you think 36 inches, what is that? It's like a small child. So I had the talons in my left hand and I had the wings against my body with my right arm. And I didn't realize how agile the neck was. She exalted me. But I'm happy for that.
Yeah.
And
It gave you another great story, Mary.
Craig had his hand up. I
Oh.
saw.
Craig,
Just a comment on the nomenclature, the Harriet Tubman story connected with the naming of Harriet.
yes.
We've been studying a lot of Henry Nouwen's work here. My professor is from St. Michael's College here at the University of Toronto, and all of Henry Nouwen's works are here because Nouwen worked in Toronto for many years. But we've been studying, obviously, his famous text, The Wounded Healer. And I'm making a connection here with the course I'm taking is the theology of ministry. And Nouwen talks a lot about how when we've actually been wounded, when we are fully aware of our own woundedness and are participating with God in our healing, we are then the best equipped to be compassionate healers to others in the church, which again connects with this idea that resurrection, that in the wounds of Christ, we are healed, that the crucifixion has to happen, but then resurrection comes once those wounds are healed through compassion. And the story of Harriet the Eagle healing veterans, who amputees, people who have really been traumatized by violence and deep woundedness because of military violence. I think that this is something that we should think more deeply about. How is it that our own wounds, are we healing our wounds so that we can heal to love and serve others and bring others to new life and resurrection?
Thank you, Craig. Thank you very much. It's a beautiful way to
But
summarize.
I think animals feel us, many animals feel us
Yes.
in unspoken ways, obviously. And to me, that is one of the mystical things that I find the most interesting in terms of looking at creation is the ability of, a dog or a cat to actually feel.
Yes.
And one thing I know that's important, and we don't have to talk about now, but is in Native American culture, the eagle has a real place of honor, and the eagle's feathers are the most highly prized. And it's interesting how people have related to this kind of ugly face. You know, it's a very forbidding face, and yet it looks fierce.
It's
And yet
unforgettable
always
though, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's
the ability for that bird to look at you, and it's, these are the mysteries that I think are absolutely, you cannot explain. Reason loses its hold on you.
yes. And you know, when Harriet died, and she died of old age, she became arthritic and eating less and so forth. The tributes that poured in about her, and getting to read those from kids, you know, what they learned from, grew from, or there's one from a grandmother who had a history of depression, and what the difference that this bird made for her. So I think what you've said, Craig, and all of us, that she had something that she grew through and around and was able to give back. Anything else?
I just, about 6 or 8 years ago, we do a summer picnic with Holy Apostles. And about 6 or 8 years ago, we did it on the banks of the Mississippi. And we had baptism, so we did baptism in the river. And, you know, we walked down to the river to pray. We got down there, and as we were doing the baptisms, Jared, we were doing the baptisms, a bald eagle came down. The sweet. And I had hardly ever seen one up until that, and I grew up in Tennessee. But it was just so.
Yes, yes. When Mary and I are out and about or starting on a trip, you know, when we see an eagle, it's just a sign to us that we're on the right path. Yes.
We live near the Franklin Avenue Bridge, a couple of blocks from the river. And so we see eagles and other raptors, sometimes not eagles, but raptors in our yard, in our trees. But crossing the bridge often and driving right along the river at that place, it's a very common sight just to see eagles and other raptors. It's really quite spectacular.
You know, we are so lucky with this here, because most people don't have, you know, if you look up, you're going to see an eagle today. They're around, and yeah, they are fairly common now. Yes, Mark.
So one thing that I find fascinating about the encounters that are described here is the way in which you mentioned it in your presentation, Lynn. We get put in touch with the wild in these encounters. And why that's healing is very, very interesting to me, right? It suggests that we, at some level that can be difficult to tap into sometimes, want that which is very different from ourselves, or perhaps something that seems different, but touches on some kind of common shared experience, shared world of which we are a part. So it's this jolting out of domestication, perhaps, that we experience in our day-to-day lives, that can be uncomfortable, can be really kind of excruciating sometimes, and yet fuels us, puts us in touch with something that we don't ordinarily encounter.
You know, and
It can be very tender.
And like King Solomon said, it's too much for me. When you see a creature in its perfect self, doing whatever that is, swooping, catching a fish, and positioning it just so, or feeding their young, or just the beauty of one with the sun up. You all need to be out there birding. That's what. But yeah, it takes us out of ourselves, doesn't it? Like I was. Thank you all for your.
These two bird presentations have been just sublime. I got them. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And thanks, Craig, for thinking of it. Yeah.
Yes, thank you to Kathy and thank you to Lynn. I'm so delighted that you could share your passion and love for birds and what birds teach us and preach to the world if we're paying attention to them. So I'm so glad that this came together. Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay.
Craig, for seeing it. Thank you for,
Yes.
you know what, it took you to see
The
congregation
possibility.
and to connect us. So I appreciate your insight and your knowing, your deep knowing. Thank you, Craig.
Thanks, Kathy.
And please join us next week for
Yeah.
more thoughts on biomimicry and resurrection.
Good,
You
good.
know what that is yet, or?
Craig, can you refresh my memory? I know Don Weinkoff is doing something on engineering.
Yes.
Now I'm thinking of switching it to some engineering aspects of flight.